Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of the New Standard. You're checking out the program at the beginning of the legal tampering period in the National Football League. And before we jump into free agency and everything Russell Wilson, what is legal tampering? That's just really weird to me. I never understood it. The NFL is very creative, sort of like alternative facts. Legal tampering, huh? Yeah, tampering in and of itself does not suggest legality. But in the National Football League, it is what it is. But with that, if you guys want to participate in the program, hit me with a like and a subscribe. Go to the program, The New Standard, on YouTube. If you catch us via podcast, you can catch us the same way. I want to send a big shout out to my co-host, my partner in crime, Neil Coulong. And so, obviously, we are coming to you after Russell Wilson indeed was signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I got this one wrong. I got it extremely wrong. I did not think that the Steelers were going to let Russ cook. I did not think that the Steelers were going to allow Russell Wilson to come to the 1-5-2-3-3 and cook delicacies and treats. But the question will be, ultimately, is he still a chef? Is he a sous chef? Is he a line cook? Or is he a high school grad who warms up food at Chipotle? We shall see. But what I will say is this, is why I was dead wrong about this was I didn't trust my own 3 Ps that I came up with a long time ago to help me predict and to evaluate free agency and transactions and player movement and so on and so forth. And that's the 3 Ps are production, pay, pedigree. Production meaning what type of player are you? How do you play on the field? Pay. What's your compensation? How much are you paid? What are you worth on the open market? What are you worth to the Steelers? What are you worth to a new team? Pedigree. What's your pedigree that you're bringing into the league or you have in the league? Are you a high draft pick? Are you a player that has a name, that has history, that's performed at a high level, that's won championships, won playoff games? What are you? And so I think when you combine the 3 Ps, you can start to frame and use the 3 Ps as a predictive model to kind of see what what transactions will be made and what teams are going to do. Now, the 3 Ps work for the most part if you don't let your ego and your personal bias and preference, another P, get in front of the 3 Ps. Me, I've never really thought Russell Wilson was a great quarterback or a great player. He's had great success. I thought he was in great circumstances. I never thought he was a great player. I always thought that, he was sort of like Clyde Drexler. If you remember Clyde Drexler from the Portland Trail Blazers back in the day, Clyde could go right. Clyde couldn't go left. Never thought that Russ was a guy that could utilize the middle of the football field, that he was a second reaction player who could get it in chunks. Let Russ cook. He could make those magical plays. And, I never thought that you could sustain an offense off of that, off of Russell Wilson chefing. But Russ made 9 Pro Bowls, won a Super Bowl, went to a couple of Super Bowls, and got paid like he's the best chef in the world. He got paid like Gordon Ramsay on steroids by the Denver Broncos. So Obviously, he convinced someone more knowledgeable than myself that indeed he could chef, serve the meal, farm for the groceries, go farm the table, and do everything else in between. With that being said, why I was dead wrong about him coming to Pittsburgh was because I just didn't think he was a very good player. And, my brother always messes with me as if I have a bone to pick with Russell Wilson, like Russell Wilson did something to me personally. He should have handed off the ball to Marshawn Lynch. But other than that, I mean, I have no personal axe to grind with Russell Wilson. So I let my personal whatever, how I frame him as a player to get in front of the three P's. When you look at the three P's again, performance, pay, pedigree, it makes perfect sense. Another P to bring him into Pittsburgh. Considering what the current quarterback situation is, another P in Kenny Pickett. They had one quarterback on the roster. And this was a quarterback that Steeler Nation was clamoring for Mason Rudolph to start over it. Just put that, and I'm going to use another P, in perspective that a fan base was clamoring to start Mason Rudolph over your first round draft pick in Kenny Pickett. So the quarterback room was destitute. It's not the greatest quarterback room in the National Football League. So that's the context in which Russell Wilson was coming in, that the performance of the quarterbacks on the roster warranted that the Steelers bring in competition and look outside their building to find another quarterback. So when you talk about performance, that made sense there. Pedigree. Russell Wilson has all the pedigree in the world. 9 Pro Bowls, 2 Super Bowls, won a Super Bowl, has been QB1, and won a ton of games in this league. The pedigree is there. His resume is solidified. A couple of years ago, you could have argued that Russell Wilson would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was on that trajectory. So when you line up performance and pedigree, the performance of the Steeler quarterbacks, the pedigree of Russell Wilson, and the unique circumstance that $38 million of his salary, his pay, is going to be provided, another P, by his previous franchise, another P, the Denver Broncos. So when you couple the fact that you can acquire a Super Bowl winning quarterback that undoubtedly was a QB1, undoubtedly at some point in time in his career probably was a top 5 starter, at least top 7. If you can inject that type of guy into your quarterback room that consists of Kenny Pickett, who has no pedigree in the league, or his pedigree is that he's a first-round draft pick. He hasn't done anything in the league. He has not performed at a high level. So to be able to bring Russell Wilson, a Super Bowl winning quarterback, into your franchise for league minimum, it just, once it happened, it hit me, and my uncle texted me and said, "Hey man, what do they have to lose? Russell Wilson for about $1.5 million." And sometimes, we can make this stuff way too complicated. And maybe I did over the first 10 minutes in my 3 P's in my equation, and somehow trying to make it mathematical to get listeners, you're checking out the new standard. It's the Russ that saved Pittsburgh. Oh, yeah. I mean, I came up with this whole 3P stuff, but I mean, in this situation, this is a complex. But sometimes I know for myself, trying to make it mystical, magical, super lyrical, spiritual, all that stuff gets in front of what is very basic. The quarterback room is garbanzos in Pittsburgh. It is average. It might be the worst quarterback room in the National Football League. And to be able to bring in, regardless of if people think he's a weirdo or that his best redeeming quality is his wife and her R&B cuts and her catalog, that he upgrades the Steelers quarterback room. I mean, you have a guy, I believe, in Kenny Pickett last year, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, threw for 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Now, I don't want to put a ton of stock into counting stats because I think to accurately assess a player, you have to dig into their film. You have to watch them play football. You can't just go to a stat sheet, look at their stats, and say, oh, this guy is good. You can get fooled that way. I mean, as novices that we are, that's fine for us. But I'm sure that Arthur Smith, and it's reported that Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin, they dug into the film and went through the football stuff. And apparently, and that's where the 3Ps come in. Regardless of maybe what they saw on film from a performance perspective, the pay part of the 3Ps trumps everything. He costs $1 million. Just imagine, hey, your starting quarterback could cost $1 million and arguably be as good as Cleveland's quarterback, who's going to have a cap hit of $64 million this year. So when you look at being able to bring a player in with the pedigree of Russell Wilson at that number, I think it was too good to be true. I mean, and again, I didn't trust the 3Ps and keep it simple, stupid, because the 3Ps, when you look at that, it's screaming, yes, they are going to sign Russell Wilson. Now, I think I've kind of given my mea culpa, but in a part of that, though, I think I've explained why they signed Russ. It is an important, and the one thing you've heard them say over and over, that they needed to bring in competition for Kenny Pickett. Now, if this does not light a fire under Kenny Pickett and make Kenny Pickett and put him in a position where he has to play his best ball, then it's time to move on. And people keep asking me, like, what was your solution, Lance? What would you have done? Who would you have brought in? I like Jacoby Brissett. I've had a man crush probably for years on Gardner Minshew. I kind of would have went that route. But Russell Wilson at $1.5 million, it's hard to beat. Again, that pay, that sticker price for Russ is just irresistible, given his pedigree. So I understand that. But when I look at the Steelers, the question about this as well is you got to ask yourself, is this really a quarterback competition? Because that's what you've heard Omar Khan say. That's what you've heard TJ Watt say, Cam Hayward say, Mike Tomlin say. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. One thing I do notice is on teams where their quarterback is good, they ain't saying, like, let's bring in some competition. Bringing some competition is another way of saying, man, he can't play. I mean, that's kind of, if you want to read between those tea leaves and between those lines, they like, look, dog, he can't play. Now, it'll be an interesting to see if It is actually a competition. Whose job is it to win or to lose? When you look at the Russell Wilson 1 year, about $1.5 million, it tells me a couple of things. It tells me there wasn't a big market for Russell Wilson, regardless of the fact that Denver Broncos are paying for like 99% of the nut for him, that there wasn't a lot of competition in the market for his services. Also, the 1 year suggests he could actually be released if he doesn't perform well in training camp. And the 1 year in and of itself screams, we are not committed to you. Period. It also suggests how desperate the Steelers quarterback situation is, and that they will bring in Russ on a 1 year to just try to win this year. But Russell Wilson, make no mistake, is on a prove it. And Kenny Pickett is on a prove it as well. I think in some respects, both guys are on a 1 year. Whoever plays quality football, plays really good, will be the starter, and the organization will commit to them for the next several years. I think right now it's hard for me to say who I think is going to start, although I think that Russell Wilson obviously is the better player. But I think the question is, how much better is he? And that's what we're going to see when we see this quarterback competition. So I think it's a legit quarterback competition. I think it's a competition that puts both of them squarely in the same position as to whoever wins it. The guy who loses doesn't have a future with the team. And Russell's future is only a year. And they're not committed to him past that. If Kenny Pickett doesn't rise to the challenge and win the job, he's out. It's over. It was a failed experiment. They drafted a quarterback or overdrafted a guy, never was able to prepare him, and that's that. The other thing I think when you think of Russell Wilson coming to the Steelers, he ticks a box I think that Tomlin likes and Tomlin needs. As a defensive coach, I think Tomlin feels very comfortable with a veteran where he can focus on the football team, defensive side of the ball, and other things, and kind of leave the offensive stuff to Wilson and Arthur Smith. I think that allows him to take his hands off of it. And also, I think it gives him a little carte blanche and some room to be a little more aggressive, because I think he might trust Russ to not turn it over because he's a vet and that he's been in certain situations. So, I think this move leaves Kenny right where he was already. I don't think it changes anything. Kenny was a guy that's on his last legs, I think, in Pittsburgh. He's going to be given one more chance. Biggie, give me one more chance to try to be the guy. And if he can't be the guy, he's out of here. I don't think that changes because of Russell Wilson. What's Wilson's future with the Steelers? I think he has to kill it. He's on a prove-it deal. But the interesting thing is if he does kill it in Pittsburgh, hell, you got to sign him the next year. And do you want to commit a ton of resources to an older player? That's not Kirk Cousins with the torn ACL going to the Atlanta Falcons. And that leaves, and we won't jump into that on this particular show, but that leaves also a very interesting questions about Justin Fields and just how valued he is in the National Football League. But I was dead wrong about Russ. The 3 Ps were right. I did not trust the 3 Ps because I let my ego, and just because I can't fathom seeing Russ as a good player, get into the way of the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps were yelling at me. Are they going to sign Russ? The question is, again, for Steeler Nation, is Russ a chef, a sous chef, a line cook, or the dude cooking chicken out of high school at Chipotle? Which one is he? Why did they sign Russ? Quarterback room stinks. And Russ is cheap. At that price point, another P, to be able to bring in a Super Bowl winning caliber quarterback, You've got to do it. And it also shows that the Steelers are committed to winning at all costs and that they are not willing to sacrifice the season. They're just not going to do it. Is there really a quarterback competition? Absolutely. I think the quarterback competition is open. You're not giving carte blanche QB1 status to a guy that you signed to a 1-year vet min. You're not. He's going to have to compete for the job. Just like the quarterback who I believe had 6 touchdown passes, 4 interceptions, is going to have to compete for the job. So there will be a competition. Where does it leave Pickett? The same place he was before they signed Russell Wilson. Unknown future with the Steelers. But this all leads to who will be the day one starter. I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. But if you had a Russell Wilson to my head, I would say that it's Kenny Pickett. I think that they are going to, I think it's probably 60-40 right now, Kenny Pickett. I think Russell Wilson's going to have to do a lot to win the job. I think he's going to have to overwin the job. Like they say, overstand. He's going to have to overwin the job, I think. But either way, I think, a quarterback room of Russell Wilson and Kenny Pickett, look, man, I'm not getting warm and cozy and fuzzy over that. I mean, not at all, especially when you see these killers at the quarterback position in the AFC. But it's what the Steelers have at this point. The one thing that I do know that I'm pretty certain on is that Mason Rudolph ain't coming back. Ding dong, the Mason Rudolphs. I think Russell Wilson, if he did anything in his time and coming to Pittsburgh, is he got Mason Rudolph out of here. And thanks, Mason, for those last 3 games to get the Steelers to the Super Bowl. And we see that the Mason Rudolph, and I could be wrong, this show is coming out on the Monday of the pre-tampering, legal tampering period. Maybe Mason Rudolph gets signed to a long-term deal as this show comes out, but Russell Wilson is going to cook in Allegheny County. Hope he's not looking for tofu. Vegan eats. Great sushi. But anyway, we're going to conclude the program. And Russ, it's the Russ that saved Pittsburgh. Oh, yeah. And with that, we're going to conclude the program. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe. Go Steelers.